You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, great to be back alongside you.
It is always a pleasure to be alongside you, Eugene.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And big shout out to everybody who is joining us here on the show. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, well, there we go. For those of you watching on YouTube, this is a good reminder to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, then hit the bell so you get the alerts to the things you subscribe to, because you never know what's going to be happening here on Breakthrough News, so you don't want to miss anything. So make it easy for yourself by hitting the bell, then after you hit subscribe, so that way you get the alerts for the things that you have subscribed to, all the great content we have coming out on a regular basis, including dispatches with Rania Khalek, among many, many other great things being produced by our team here. And if you happen to be watching us on Free Speech TV, no need to do anything else. Just keep watching and keep supporting Free Speech TV however you can. Big shout out to the whole FSTV team for making it possible for us to appear for you here on that platform as well. Rania, are there other pieces of information you would like for our viewers to know?
Yeah, I want to know, Eugene, were you laughing when my electricity flickered off just now? I feel like you enjoyed the electricity going out. I'm not sure.
It's not that I enjoyed the electricity. It's that I enjoy how you there's a level of unpredictability about Breakthrough News. It's not the same thing every week. It's not just, paint by numbers. We're really doing it here.
Wow, yeah, that's a good point. Well, if you appreciate our work here at Breakthrough News, just a reminder, we are an independent media outlet. We are able to sustain ourselves and continue growing with support from our audience. So if you are able to, please consider becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news. For as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch like this very cool Breakthrough mug. And you can help Rania keep her lights on. My electricity bill is, you wouldn't believe the electricity bill in this country. It's like we should do a whole Freedom Side live episode on Lebanon's electricity infrastructure. That's a story for another day.
Indeed, perhaps even a mini documentary. I mean, I'm interested in utilities. I'm always curious to hear about that kind of thing. At least we know how if we need to start a business.
Shout out to the generator mafia man.
Yeah.
In my neighborhood.
Wow. Well, I don't know anything about that. I've never heard of them, nor any. It sounds all totally legal, above board, and positive.
Our next guest knows what I'm talking about.
Entrepreneurs. We love entrepreneurs on Breakthrough News. Don't want anyone to come knocking. Nonetheless, thank you for everyone who's been a patron already. Of course, really appreciate everything you've done. Big shout out to everyone who's done anything to help promote the show. And right now might be a good time to promote the show, since we are about to dive into what is another great episode here. Let folks know that we are here. Text message, call, smoke signal, knock on a door, do whatever you need to do that is safe for those around you in order to alert them to the fact that we are getting ready to get started here on the Freedom Side this week. First full week of May. We're going to turn to our first story here, Rania, which is obviously, one of the biggest stories on earth and has been for some time. And that is not just the situation in Gaza, but the extremely acute humanitarian crisis happening there with the restriction of aid, the stopping of aid that has been happening there for, I think, over 60 days at this point. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Afif Nassouli, who's a humanitarian medical worker in Gaza. Afif, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor always to be with you.
Well, it's an honor to have you with us. And as I mentioned, it's been about 60 days, I believe, since Israel has completely cut off the flow of aid into Gaza. You're on the ground working on logistics. And I mean, just give us a sense of what you're seeing now. I mean, what this famine looks like, what people are able to eat. I mean, I guess this includes you yourself there as someone who's on the ground.
Famine looks like the least fortunate people sort of crowding around community kitchens with pots and pans and sort of begging these community kitchens, which are all but out of rice, for something, for some morsels. I've seen so many kids crying from hunger, which I feel is like particularly hard to see and particularly hard to experience because it's so visceral. It looks like people eating rice off the floor and molded bread. Doctors and staff are, as a logistics person, I'm like acutely aware of doctors and staff not getting the things they need to operate. So they're getting sick. a lot of people are eating like one meal of rice at night if they're lucky. And I guess really practically, it looks like everyone is really just so skinny. And that might sound really weird to say, but it literally is just so visually apparent how many people are just feeling so hungry and skinny. And I know men who have lost like hundreds of pounds in the last 100 pounds in the last year. A couple of men have shown me pictures of themselves, and they are literally half the size of what they were. I personally have been eating like about one meal a day. I even really got sick the other week, last week. I don't know if you can hear these bombs, but they're getting worse. Um, and I got really sick because I just wasn't getting enough calories. And what's weird that I'm experiencing is getting like skinnier, but also feeling really bloated because I'm eating like high salt canned goods that I brought from my man, and like salty, just whatever it is. It's just canned, or it's like rice. Um, it looks like going to these health cluster meetings where there's just more problems than there are solutions. Um, it's weird because it's also experiencing Israel trying to control the aid and displace, like having a plan to displace people, and it's just gotten so bad that I'm actually really, I mean, I've been pretty positive this entire time and inspired, but for the last week or so, it's just felt really sad and hard, and I feel it in my body. There's just not a lot of stuff to buy at the market. Even the market is empty. It's scary, and it doesn't look like Israel's stopping anytime soon. So there just doesn't feel like anything. There's a really sad feeling of like we're literally going hungry. Like the Gazans feel like they're literally being abandoned, and that slow, cruel famine is different than acute bombs. It's slow and it's choking.
I mean, that just sounds completely horrific. And it's certainly, like you said, I mean, the bombs are still falling. This is all happening. It's like everything all at once, and Israel's threatening to make it worse. You mentioned, you deal a lot with the doctors and the medics that are treating injured people. We talk a lot about food, which you just discussed in terms of, how difficult it is to have to go without it. I also can't imagine the mental like slowdown that goes with just being hungry all the time. But the blockade is also stopping so much more than that. I also mentioned, I know there's water is hard for people to find. A lot of people spend all day looking for just a tiny amount of water to drink, which we forgot to ask you about. But I'm curious, what kinds of medical supplies or basic necessities are no longer getting in as well? How is that affecting your team's ability to provide treatment with people or even transport the injured? And again, like all of this with the backdrop of being weak and hungry.
I'll say that like the last couple of I don't know if it's very abnormal, but the last couple of rotations, a lot of nurses and doctors haven't gotten in. So I also extended my stay here. The amount that you're supposed to stay is 4 weeks, and now I'm staying 8 weeks. There aren't gloves. There's no soap. There's no types of fluids to put IVs into people to just get them hydrated. Like you said, water is like the desalination plants run on fuel. Fuel is low. So you're just getting less in terms of like medications. There's like not people getting let in. Like there was a lot of people rejected from getting in this last round. So a lot of just supplies, like just regular stethoscopes, things like that, that people bring just for their own capacity to like help people and then leave here so that, there's just more supply, even if it's just one or two things. Those aren't coming in right now. It means people are dying from like avoidable diseases. It's hard because it was already overwhelming, and now it feels like we're at this stage where it's like almost hard to comprehend how they're still going. Like I said, like 70% of like water desalination plants, the infrastructure has been destroyed, and that's like just a rough estimate. I'm sure it could be more than that. So as I said, there's no more fuel. So no fuel has been let in. A few days ago, they were saying that like the hospitals were about to run out of fuel. So once the hospitals run out of fuel, they can't run. They cannot like work. There are also ambulances that need fuel. There's so much that obviously fuel is extremely important to just running things. So it's hard to get things to people like tourniquets or medication or food because you have to really think twice about whether you're going to use that car. And then walking, you don't know who you're walking with. The other day there's been so many massacres on, my colleagues were 50 feet from a massacre last week that happened on a tuk-tuk, and there was blood all over the car. It was so intense. It's like nothing's being let in, which has these ripple effects, which I think are hard to fathom. But when you see it really live, you just realize we all like run on so many little resources that we don't even think about. I think, as you were saying in Lebanon, it's like you get a closer understanding of like when electricity is being provided by like one, situation, and it can easily go out, like the Zaim, is in charge. It's much, much more intense here, even because nothing is now in this enclave. Like it's been since early March, nothing's been let in. So it's hard. I mean, I can't express it in any other way other than it's just really, really hard to watch and experience.
No, I almost said I can only imagine, but honestly, I really can't imagine. But, in the context of so much of what we're seeing, the massacres you mentioned, I think, of course, the one that caught a lot of people's eyes, what happened in the restaurant recently. I mean, it's hard to even really imagine, even saying whether things are better or worse. But does it seem like the intensity and the bombings and the attacks is increasing recently? I mean, what are you seeing in that sense? Does it feel like there's just a continued ramping up of casualties, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, the massacre that happened in Gaza, we call it Gaza, but it's like Gaza City. I was literally, I was just there and had left on a tuk-tuk down south to like within an hour or two of that bombing.
Wow.
So like feeling, and fate is fate, and we believe that as Muslims, but it's just weird to like experience that feeling of those people died and I didn't die, and I was literally like I just had to go down south. Like I could have easily been walking around. It happened really close. When I'm up north, I'm staying with Bisan Auda and her father, and we do the things we need to do as logistics people because they also have a big network. So there's, you crowdsource, you help each other do the things you need to do for healthcare workers, go on desalination, run like distribution of water. These attacks feel like they're like 82 people were killed yesterday, like 60 something people have been killed today. Like it's becoming a situation where not only are people dying in a higher number by acute aggressive violence, they're also hungry while they're dying. And I've talked to a few people today that it feels like they feel like it's been the worst it's ever been in terms of just being so hungry and in pain. So I don't know. It's hard to put it into words, but it just feels like this has gotten so bad in many ways at once, but in two very large ways, which is people are suffering from inside their bodies, and then they're also suffering from outside their bodies because of the violence that's happening on them. And yeah, the Thai restaurant that was bombed, it was just surreal to just be a person that understands your movement is like really, really, really like risky. Like you don't know what is coming next.
I mean, I don't even know what to say, Afif. It's just what you're describing is so insane. And on top of the horrors that we're witnessing, Israel's promising to escalate even more. I'm sure you've seen the news. They've called up all these reservists. They're demanding people evacuate to even smaller and smaller enclaves. They're talking about reconquering Gaza. It's kind of like Ben Gvir's dreams are being enacted. I'm just curious, seeing that take place right now, what's your reaction to all these threats from the Israelis that are growing with intensity and ferocity with nobody standing in the way, it seems? And what does that mean on the ground? Is this something people are talking about? Is it something that people are frightened about?
I'll say that the tone has definitely shifted. I feel people are actually really just unsure of what tomorrow looks like. I say my reaction is that this was always the plan. Like I think we can comfortably say that this was before is like I said before, I remember last time I said like Israel's kind of like an urban development company, and the company culture is Zionism, and it makes a big religious appeal that this is like extremely important to their sort of background and their history. But it's really just about money and like owning more land. It's like really about that's something that has been happening since before October 7th. And I feel like what's going on right now is the exacting of a plan that has been in motion for a long time. And being here is surreal because you're literally watching the thing you knew was coming, but it just still feels shocking. So it's weird to feel shocked, but because it's like, of course, this was what they wanted. They're supremacists. They want Lebanon. They want Syria. They think Gaza is theirs. And it really feels like it's a matter of money over people's lives. And I do think that this is a crime against humanity. And I think Palestinians are 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 really aware of the fact that no one is trying to help them. Like, I think that so many of their experiences in the last couple of weeks have been so incredibly intense that there is this feeling really probably not coming. It's probably not coming. And I feel like that's new in the conversation. Maybe I've been getting more intimate with people and they're telling me more of a truth than maybe what they were trying to, feel strong about. But at some point it becomes like you don't plan for the future. You're just like really just trying to get your meal, your like calories in today, and tomorrow you literally have no idea where the water and food is coming from because there just isn't that around. And so I mean, I could talk for hours about it, but it does feel like, this is something that was going to happen anyways. And reading the messages from like the joint health community, like the like more formal UN sort of bodies or the WHO bodies that are like, Israel wants to like pass out aid, and Israel is going to not pass out aid in the north so that everyone moves to the south. It's just surreal cruelty because there's so many people in the north that don't have food. And if, you're not going to give them anything, you're going to block them from getting anything and forcing them to move down south on a hunger level that is insane. It just, again, like I said, I'm like at a loss for words. Like I'm also hungry. Like, so it's hard to even put it into words, the cruelty that's going on right now.
No, I think that's a critically important point, and it just, I think something that a lot of people are wondering is how do people keep going? How are people surviving? I mean, what does that look like? Because I think, for many people, it feels like the limits of human endurance, are being exceeded just based on what we're hearing.
I think I want to be positive and I want to highlight the gratefulness and the humbleness and the faith people have, because it's true. They really, really unbelievably say alhamdulillah after, which means you should like they thank God in every sentence. And it's this psychology that gives them strength, because I think that they are capable of just understanding that having nothing is the test of God for some reason. It is what is written, and it is going to be certainly written into the history of the world that this was wrong. And they have faith that everyone will know that they are going to be, there will be justice in some realm. But as I said, the more conversations I've been having lately, the more intimate conversations are, honestly, people don't like, they're not planning for their future. They're not planning like they have a future. I talked to one woman today. She told me about all of her friends that died. She showed me pictures of them, and then she showed me pictures of family that died. I had a meeting with another person who, psychosocial documentation is a part of my work here, and just getting their sort of traumatic stories and really understanding what they're going through is a part of this. And they don't have a way out. Like, there's nothing coming to save them. It feels like people are less hopeful than they were, and that they're at a breaking point, because even if they're extremely strong and faithful, they are seeing the writing on the wall, which is they don't have food to eat, and they're being bombed, and they're being displaced, and Gaza's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And they know that Hamas is like willing to do what Israel kind of wants, and that even all of them at this point would leave Gaza if they were allowed. And so it's like, doesn't feel like, and I don't mean all of them, but many of them would say, yes, just get me out. Like, I'm a regular person and I need out. Like, I need to eat. And they're not doing that. So they're like, well, it sounds like we're just being exterminated. Like, it sounds like there's no future here. And those conversations are hard because I have nothing to say. I have nothing to say. Usually I'm chock full of sort of hopefulness and, like the type of person who I really, really enjoy trying to help people feel better. And it's hard to do that because it's like, you're just being fraudulent. You're being a fraud, you know? And that's what's going on right now in terms of tone and in terms of vibe of the feelings that's going on.
You know, Afif, it sounds like, and you know, you can tell me if this doesn't sound like the right characterization, but it sounds like doing aid work in a death camp. Is that what it kind of feels like you're doing?
And it feels like I'm doing aid work in a death camp and that I'm not doing aid work at all, because it's like all I can actually offer at this point is, which I do think is important, is company, is stories and talking and being able to just literally go back and forth and discuss what we think and how we feel and just being human together. But in terms of giving aid, there's no equipment, there's no food. So it feels sometimes really hard to admit, but it feels like, what can I do to make these people feel better? And the answer keeps coming back to me. And it's like, there's nothing you can do. Like, you are only one person, and it is going to take the entire world to stop this. And the world is not doing anything.
Well, Afif, we really appreciate you being willing to join us again and helping shed some light for what's really going on. Afif Nasuli, humanitarian medical worker in Gaza, thank you so much for joining us on the Freedom Side.
Always appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Rania?
I mean, it's just the world. We live in a disgusting world that's just watching a Holocaust play out, and it's horrifying. And people like Afif are angels, to literally provide company for people in an extermination camp. Gaza's become an extermination camp, and again, I spend a lot of my day, Eugene, watching CNN and MSNBC and flipping through the two, and then Al Jazeera, and I gotta say, like, the American media is barely touching on Gaza. It's barely happening. It's barely happening. There's a Holocaust taking place, and they're just like too busy.
Indeed. Well, we are not too busy, and we're going to stick more or less on Gaza with our next story here. We want to continue to follow up with the work the Hind Rajab Foundation has been doing to hold war criminals accountable, and we are very honored to be joined by Diab Jaja, who is a Belgian-Lebanese political activist, teacher, writer, and co-founder and president of the Hind Rajab Foundation and its parent organization, the March 30th Movement. Diab, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you here, and the work you all have been doing has been very important from our point of view. I was hoping you could just start by telling us about the case you all filed at the ICC in early May that I think bears very directly on the namesake for the foundation, Hind Rajab, and those who are responsible for her death.
Yes. Well, as you know, our foundation has been called after the martyr Hind Rajab, the 5-year-old girl who was slaughtered together with her family under the sight of the whole world in a car by an Israeli tank. And not only Hind was a victim together with her family, but also the ambulance workers who were sent to save her. And the most important thing is that this all happened in live streaming, basically, because everyone was aware that Hind was still alive in the car. I'm sure you all remember that day, and we were waiting, and everybody was asking, "What about the girl? Is she now saved? Is she not saved?" And despite all that, Hind was killed by the Israeli army. So for us, this was a very symbolic event, and we chose the name of Hind Rajab for our foundation because we believe that it symbolizes many things. First of all, it symbolizes the innocence of the victims, which is something that is very common with all the other children, but also all the other civilian victims in Gaza. It symbolizes the impunity with which the Israelis are acting, because despite the fact that it was a child, despite the fact that the whole world was aware of what was going on, despite the fact that an ambulance was dispatched, the Israelis killed Hind and killed the ambulance workers. So this shows the arrogance and the bloodlust of this genocidal endeavor. So therefore, we chose our name based on this, and obviously this case particularly is very important for us. So we started researching the circumstances of this case, and after a year of research, we were able of identifying the responsible brigade and battalion and platoon responsible for this crime. So beginning of this month, we filed a case on the day of Hind's birthday, when she was supposed to turn 7. That was a symbolic moment for us. So we filed a case against the commander of the brigade, Beni Aharon, at the ICC. But this is not the end of it. This is just the start of it. And we will keep working on filing cases against all the involved officers and soldiers in this crime.
I think what you all are doing is so incredibly important. There's obviously so many crimes that the Israelis have committed. It's probably overwhelming. So I'm curious if you can walk us through, this is obviously one of the most high profile cases, what happened to Hind Rajab, because we have the audio recording of her asking for help, and it really took the world by storm. But can you talk a little bit about other cases where you've been able to, find the identities of officers and file lawsuits as well?
Right. Well, we work on several levels in these cases. I think the main characteristic of what we do is called what we call offensive litigation. So we are not about defense, which is also necessary sometimes, but we want to go after the responsibles, and not only the big guys, not only the politicians, but especially the rank and file. And we always believe that this is something that the Israelis, are afraid of, because it makes these pursuits concrete. While, somebody like Netanyahu can enjoy, political immunity and cover up, these soldiers, officers are, less, let's say, receptive of these things, right? So the idea is to file cases against mostly dual nationals. These are people who have the double nationality, Israeli and another nationality, and file cases in their home countries. When we do that, we are not faced with a debate about jurisdiction, because these countries have jurisdiction on their citizens. And secondly, there's no debate on immunity. Again, something also that is often used for politicians. So this is the main track of our work, but this is a slow track. This is something that takes long time. And, these cases, we prepare slowly and we have the time. We're not under pressure to do that. The second level, which is the level through which people, discovered the Hind Rajab Foundation, are the cases that we do against what we call traveling soldiers. These are Israeli soldiers that go on tourism. Most of the time it's between tours in Gaza, between killing sprees, if you want to put it like that, and they go travel and enjoy vacation, and then they go back, right? So when these people travel, we monitor these soldiers, and when they travel and we have a dossier, we have a file against them, then we file no matter where they are, whether they are in East Asia or whether they are in Latin America or the United States. We try to build a legal file against them, and this is basically the process we are doing. Of course, behind this, there's a lot of research involved. There's also building a quite large network of lawyers across the globe. So it's always work in progress. But we are going with this till the end. This is for us a mission that we will not just we're not experimenting with this. This is like a life vocation. We're going to do this till the end of our lives, and till justice is done or served, at least partly.
Mm-hmm. And one of the issues that I think people are discussing with the unbelievable violence being visited on people in Gaza is the level of deliberateness versus collateral damage, this, that, or the third. But one of the elements I think that is important about the complaint you all filed vis-a-vis Hind's case herself, the 401st Armored Brigade, is that it was a deliberate attack, and that the killing of the paramedics were also deliberate. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that, because I think the way sometimes these things are presented is like these are just sort of horrible accidents happening in the context of two combatants.
Mm-hmm. Right. This is one of the main things that the narrative the Israeli propaganda is using to gaslight, the popular, sentiment about what's going on in Gaza. But if you go deeper in analyzing not just the Hind case, but in general, what is going on there, the crimes and the killing and the destruction and the humiliation and the kidnapping and the torture is systematic. We are not talking about collateral damage. It's not that the Israeli army is trying to avoid these things, but is obliged by combat situations to target locations where civilians are also present. Not at all. It is very often the case that the Israeli army goes out of its way to target civilians. It's often the case that targeting civilians or civilian infrastructure is done out of any combat situation without any obligation from a battlefield. So this becomes very clear when you analyze these videos that the Israeli soldiers have been sharing, and especially when you put them into context. Then you build up that puzzle. You construct the complete picture through these puzzle pieces, and it becomes clear that whether it is the ethnic cleansing, that is the destruction of homes, the targeting of civilian, the baiting of civilian in order to target them. I mean, sometimes leaving aid packages in a certain place, waiting for the people to come out to get them and then shoot at them. Creating kill zones, creating kill traps. So these are all practices that have been too many times or too often used to be called, let's say, incidental. These are systematic behaviors. So I think this is one of the things that became very clear to us through these last 18 months, that there is an intent, a genocidal intent behind everything happening in Gaza.
Diab, I'm curious, and this is more, I guess, well, maybe you have some data to back this up, I don't know, but it seems like because the Israelis have gotten away with literally everything, it's almost like they're becoming more cruel, if that's possible. Like the individual acts are becoming more cruel. I mean, they've been cruel since the genocide started, but it's like the more impunity there is, the more ferocious and inhumane the behavior becomes. And I'm just curious if that's what it looks like to you watching this genocide unfold. It's been a year and a half now. And I mean, you think it can't get worse? And then it gets worse. There's videos of rapes, at prisons. I saw a video the other day, I'm sure you saw it too, of an Israeli soldier doing a gender reveal by bombing a structure in Gaza. I mean, it gets more warped and more disgusting, and it's like there's no bottom if this continues.
Right. I mean, I think this attitude has been there from the beginning, right? The way we see it is it still did not disappear, and it's very pervasive through the Israeli army, right? This attitude. The arrogance, the pride in the crimes, the will to boast about it, etc. However, another thing which is true is that, and this is our experience, but also I think many people observe that, and I think because of these cases that we were filing, for instance, in 30 cases, the Israeli soldier in question escaped the country where we filed the case. We're talking about 30 Israeli soldiers. This is what the Israelis themselves actually revealed. We know of a couple of these cases where the Israelis smuggled soldiers out of countries. We know that because of these filings, the Israeli army ordered the soldiers not to reveal their faces. Some of them, it's very difficult to keep this generation from posting things online. I mean, these Israeli soldiers are mostly young people. So they are posting things anyway, but many of them stopped posting. If you look at the last parade that they held in Memorial Day and the pictures they've taken, it was almost, ridiculous to, they were taking pictures with their backs to the camera and their faces hidden. So there is, like the idea, I think, we should avoid falling into an idea that they are untouchable. They are not untouchable, and they know it as well. If they felt that they were untouchable, they will not be taking all these measures and escaping countries, etc. They know that they are not untouchable. I think it is a hybrid situation where you have the awareness that, in the back of their minds, they know that some people, not only us, but many other organizations, international organizations, legal bodies, that they are being watched, and that this genocide is being documented, and that people are going to file cases against them. And it is something very important to understand about the Israeli society and about the mentality in Israel in general. They want to feel or think that they are part of the West, right? They don't care what Arabs and Muslims and people of the global South think about them, right? This is like part of their racist, mindset and ideology. But they care how the West looks at them, no matter how much they pretend that they don't. Especially the elites in that country, they are very interested in being part of the West. So, this is what they are. Why also they are worrying about this. So I will not say that they are becoming harder. I think they have been hard from day one. I think they have been genocidal, and they are still like that. But I believe that the legal action, whether it's what we're doing or what the ICC did, the ICJ, South Africa, and the ICJ, is weighing somewhat on segments of that machine, is being considered. So this is our experience about it.
Mm-hmm. Diab Jaja from the Hind Rajab Foundation. Really appreciate you joining us here on the show to help break it all down. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Well, I really appreciate what they're doing. It's really important work, and he's absolutely right. I mean, it was so ridiculous, Eugene. Israeli soldiers are taking their photos now with their backs to the camera.
Yeah.
Because this might not be the consequence we'd like to see for these crimes right now, but it's something in a world that's doing nothing. So.
Yeah, no, and I think his point is very well taken. I mean, if you think you're going to be held accountable in some way, shape, or form, and you feel some level of fear about what may happen to you by having documented this issue, I think that's important because, that they're the ones who should have something to worry about given what they're doing. And if they are worried, I think that's a sign that sort of the shifts in global public opinion are not nothing. They don't actually mean nothing. And in fact, to the perpetrators, it means quite a bit. Nonetheless, a lot more to be said on that, and we'll continue to follow it, and we appreciate the Hind Rajab Foundation for coming on. A little earlier, Rania, you were able to chat with Khalid Abdalla, who people may remember, he played Dodi Fayed in The Crown, the Netflix series about the royal family, I guess specifically about the late Queen Elizabeth II. Gotta get that right. But nonetheless, also someone himself who's become very outspoken in, around Gaza. I know he was also speaking recently over the past the weekend at the festival that Counterfire and others put on. Very powerful things. So you were able to chat with him about all those things and more, Rania. So I think we want to go to that now.
I am honored to be joined by British-Egyptian actor Khalid Abdalla. You've seen him in The Green Zone, The Kite Runner, and the Netflix hit series The Crown. Khalid, thank you so much for joining me on the Freedom Side.
Thank you it's great to be here.
So let's get right into it. You have been very outspoken on Palestine. You've been very active against the genocide in Gaza. And you were recently interrogated by police for your activism. So let's start there. Tell us what happened.
In relation to that in particular, because it's an ongoing legal case, I can't speak too much about it specifically. In terms of what happened on the day. However, yes, me and others we were sent formal letters by the police to be interrogated in relation to the protest that took place on January the 18th. But, broadly speaking, this is part of the wider intimidation that we see of people that stand up for Palestine. And part of, frankly, what I see as my responsibility, not just in relation to what happened there, but also broadly speaking in my, in the territory of my work. I see it as our responsibility to break the kind of negative intimidation cycle and turn it into something positive, where people begin to see that actually standing up creates the kind of dynamics, creates the kind of figures, creates the kind of moment that inspire us, that make us want to participate in the change that we all very clearly see needs to happen. And that's what I'm trying to do, both in relation to, in relation to what happened on that day, but also more broadly speaking, in terms of whatever it is that I've tried to do on red carpets, or the ways in which I've participated in the protest movement. And that's, this is the world we're in, this is the world we need to change, and this is what it takes. And I don't really see myself as more courageous than other people. I found it immensely hard, is the truth. And I think it's important to talk about how hard it is as well. I found it incredibly hard to stand in alignment with my beliefs and be willing to face the consequences. And navigate the consequences, because it's not always about this sort of negative facing, it's navigating the consequences. And the real challenge, as I say, is to make that journey, hopefully, an inspiring one.
I think it's a really good point. I mean, you have this big platform, you're in the entertainment industry, and it's an industry where it is very difficult to speak out. I mean, you see the kind of repercussions people face professionally. They get fired from their jobs, they get less work. Can you talk a bit about the consequences people face in the entertainment industry? Because I think it's quite shocking that in the year 2025, we witnessed this year and a half of just this horrific genocide. And popular culture, like, you are such a rare voice in popular culture. It's actually uncommon to see people in these spaces say anything about the most horrific thing we've, I think, ever seen in our lifetimes.
But you know what? I think it's actually increasingly common. I mean, what I have found through standing up is that the circles of solidarity around me are so much wider than I thought they were. And in every single step of the way, and it's also been something where it's also made me think, okay, well, how much further can I go the next time? I think what we've seen is actually an unprecedented number of people stand up. I mean, I do think, obviously, we need a lot more, and there are a lot of voices that one would hope would have spoken up by now that haven't. And I think it's kind of important on our side of this to keep holding that hand out and say, like, you're still welcome. There is a genocide that we collectively have to stop. And the intimidation is real. There's no doubt about it. It is not an easy thing to do. But look at the world look at the world around us. Whether it's the genocide or it's this rising authoritarianism, I feel like I spent the basic tenets of my schooling in this country. Like, two of the most important things were the words "never again," rightly so, and to watch out for rising fascism. And here we are. With like enough collective consciousness around us that this is exactly what's happening. And where are we? Right? And where are our figures kind of standing up? I mean, and this is why, like, I keep asking myself, when, well, put it another way, for me, one of the major questions is, how do we turn this change in global consciousness, which I believe has happened and is happening, how do we turn it into an avalanche? Because I believe that what we've done over these what has happened over these last 18 months is that has begun to rise into everyone's awareness. I think a lot more people can see, but a lot of them still don't know what to do or how to do it. A lot of them feel late some of them, some feel late, like, well, if I didn't do anything months ago, how can I do something now? And it's like, no, no, no. Now, like now is a sort of ever unfolding horizon. And I think we have to keep that door open. We have to keep inspiring. We have to keep encouraging. We have to keep being open. It's a long, long, long journey. We're coming up to 77 years since the Nakba.
Yeah.
And I've lived, my first demonstration was on my father's shoulders shouting "Free Palestine." It's not the world that I hope to hand over to my children. And we have to recognize the depth of that struggle and begin to also interrogate the reasons for why it's so hard.
I mean, to speak to some of well, we can go back to the reasons, but I kind of wanted to ask you on a personal level. You are also, Egyptian as well as British, and you've been very, vocal about justice for Palestine. I'm curious, what first drew you into the Palestinian struggle, and how has your connection to it evolved over the years? Is it just your upbringing? I mean, I know as like a Lebanese person, it was very much a part of my upbringing.
It's lots. I mean, I'm the son. Both my grandfather and father were political prisoners on the left in Egypt, but so I've been part of a sense of struggle for social reforms and justice and democratic reforms throughout my life. But on top of that, I grew up around Palestinians. The Palestinian struggle is what makes me an Arab, as far as I'm concerned. It's a big part of my experience of growing up in the UK. But then, I first went to Palestine in 2000, just before the Second Intifada broke out. I went in 2008, and I went again in 2015. So I've also kind of, so I've also kind of seen the progress of the apartheid, in the collapse of in the collapse of Oslo and otherwise. So my experience of the Palestinian struggle is, on the one side, embodied, right? I have walked through Hebron. I have been interrogated. I have seen the wall up close and seen its growth, but I also saw areas A, B, and C just before the walls went up, and I'll never forget being in the service, with the driver who was I had a British passport and he didn't, and I remember I was going through a checkpoint and he just turned to me and he was like, "Every day, Khalid, every day." So. And as everyone knows, once you witness that level of apartheid, of injustice, beyond just understanding it, when the circumstances are right for you to stand up, who are you if you don't? Who are you to yourself? And alongside that, how do you then create the circumstances in your life that mean that you're not just living this constant cognitive dissonance, which is what I feel I'm living now, between like the world that is around me, which, seems to be treating it all as if it's fine, right? And I have to abide by its terms and try to be successful by its terms. While, every day I'm witnessing this genocide, this slaughter, the child on a rooftop, waving to his mother as he's been blown out the other side. And I'm remembering Muhammad ad-Durra. You know what I mean? Like, but how do I create, and how do we, not just how do we create a world in which our everyday, from the intimate to the kind of grand and collective in our joy, is in service of the world we actually want to live in, rather than the world that has created this nightmare. And I found, and this is like a big thing, I found that by standing up, rather than be like excised and excluded and cancelled or whatever, no, I've been finding my people, and my people have been finding me. And that's the most exciting thing that I didn't know to expect from standing up. And I think many people who have done the same over the last 18 months will say the same. Even those who've had a hard time, you know?
That's so important. I mean, especially when it comes to the idea of like being in community, especially in a moment like this. I also wanted to ask you, as somebody who works in the industry you work in, um, how do you navigate, I guess, having to perform and find roles for yourself in an industry that often portrays Arabs, Palestinians, Muslims, it typecasts people in a really negative light, especially as we see the kinds of consequences of the way that people from the Middle East are depicted in popular culture. It essentially has played a huge role like in dehumanizing Palestinians, Arabs more generally, and making it easier for Western governments to justify foreign policies that destroy these regions of the world.
I mean, that's been the challenge of my career, right? I mean, I graduated from university in the year 2003, right? The year of the beginning of the war. And I was there, you know, my first year at university, or my second year started with 9/11, right? So this is the world that I entered into with the responsibility then, as I started taking on roles, of how do I navigate this? How do I change it? And the answers that I have found have been a number. One is finding spaces in which I can negotiate, right, which are acceptable to me, in which I can still change things because the platform is big and wide enough. And I would consider that part of what I call my kind of like War of Terror trilogy films rather than War on Terror, right? United 93, Green Zone, and the Kite Runner, spaces in which I do believe like there were big shifts that were possible and important things. At the same time, you've also got to work like there's no change that's going to happen without films being made inside our region, right? We can't expect others to be making films about us and then just constantly be in a place where we complain when the representation isn't good enough, right? We've got to be making our own films. But that's what then ends up taking you to the barricades, right? That's why following making films in Egypt and in the Arab world, you end up in a context where you're there in the heart of a revolution and you've got to be on the front line fighting for that change. And then you face the counter-revolution, which pushes you back. Right? You learn with time that what you have to do is you end up having to work on all of these fronts and making your own work, which is why I'm also a playwright, which is why I'm also making my own films, which is why I end up again on the barricades in London when there's a genocide in Gaza. Right? So there's this mix of clear-sightedness around understanding what's going on, but also constantly finding the opportunities. You know, one of the very basic things that resulted in me when I first went out on the red carpet with the words "ceasefire now" on my hands was the fact that I was playing Dodi. And I never expected when I took on the role Dodi to discover in the heart of a genocide something that I hadn't realized is that he is one of the first characters in the history of film on kind of this side of the world, right? Of the Western Hollywood, whatever side of the world, who is an Arab character, an Arab man who you get to know not and love, not fear. And so when he dies, you mourn him. And it shocked me to just simply see that. I couldn't, I knew that the representations of us were bad and all of that, but then I was like, who else can I think of who you get to know and love? So when they die, you mourn him. And there's, and at that point it was, we were under 10,000 children, who'd been killed, and here we are. So it's a long and complicated battle, but my experience tells me that our allies are far greater than we assume. The numbers are far, far greater. But we have to sort of still have to break into that territory of silence, which I do believe is changing, where people believe they don't have a right to speak, or they're afraid that if they do speak, they won't know how to defend their opinion. And something in that is beginning to shift. And at some level, we have to hold our nerve and just keep walking the path that we're walking.
Yeah, I think that's all really important, especially in the context of the intimidation factor. I think everything you're saying is something that Israel's supporters, these Western governments, very much recognize, which is why they're using the police to come after people in the UK, in the US, to make people feel afraid because they recognize that public opinion is increasingly on the side of those who support justice and are against this genocide in Gaza. And so to that, I just want to ask you lastly here, Khalid, what do you say to fellow artists who perhaps, they do care about Palestine, but they see what's happening around them. They see the consequences. They see the, growing police state apparatus being used to suppress speech from the UK to the US, and they feel afraid to speak up.
I mean, I say stand up now before you regret that you haven't done so later. I say that I recognize that it's hard and that it's never too late to do so. I say that I don't want to, I say this not just to them, but I say this to us as well more broadly. I think it's very important that we remove, in as much as we can, shame from this. I think one of the sort of perverse effects of shaming, creating a culture of shame around who has and who hasn't stood up and all of that, is it makes it harder then for people to stand up later. And more broadly speaking, I mean, we're seeing the ruins of this authoritarian world that is able to sort of move alongside a genocide. And it just gets closer and closer and closer and closer. So where is the point at which you, whoever you are, whether you have a platform or whether you don't, right? You do have a platform. I don't give a shit about Instagram or whatever. I care more, right, about your intimate space, about your family relationships, about your friendships. Where is the space in which you begin to find the sort of true alignment that allows you to live more fulfillingly in relation to the people around you? And I do believe that that's a very, the avalanche that I was talking about earlier, it's an essential space in terms of how, if we all do just a little bit more of that, the avalanche comes closer of that change in consciousness. Like the metaphor that I kind of like to use really is what I feel is happening is kind of like it's that coastal shelving. Like where like the waves sort of hit underneath the cliff and it just keeps going underneath. And there is this point at which the cliff falls. And we don't know when that's happening, but that seems to me what's kind of happening. And I understand the kind of safety that's in a form of silence, but it needs to break. And it needs to break now.
Well, Khalid Abdalla, British Egyptian actor, I so appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, that was a great interview. Thank you, Rania.
Yeah. Yeah, he's just like absolutely lovely, and I wish more people were like him. And he's somebody who, by the way, has been politically outspoken for even before the genocide in Gaza. So really appreciate those who use their platforms the way people like Khalid do.
Indeed, as he pointed out, even before he was famous, coming from a family of folks who've been struggling. So yeah, great story, great to hear, great actor. Yeah, so thank you for joining us, Khalid, wherever you may be when you see this. Really appreciate that. Wow, sorry, it was just a good interview. thinking about a lot of things, but let's move forward here in the show before I get caught up in my own thoughts. We want to change here now to something that I think everything we've been talking about here today is deeply embedded in, that sort of the shifting sands of the world order, and in particular, the role of Africa and the way the world is changing, and let's hope changing for the better. And I think based on what happens in Africa will determine a lot of that. We are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Roger McKenzie, who's the international editor of the Morning Star newspaper, but more importantly, the author of the new book, The Rebirth of the African Phoenix, A View from Babylon. It's got a great name in and of itself, but it's a great book. Roger, thanks so much for being back with us.
So glad to be on again. Hope you're all well.
You know, as good as can be expected in this moment, and honored to have you with us. And, you know, the book is timely for many reasons, but, you know, to me, it's timely this week because obviously there will be the big celebration in Moscow tomorrow for Victory Day. And the thing that everyone is talking about is that Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who's the head of the transitional government of Burkina Faso, one of the three leaders of the Alliance for Sahel States, is there in Moscow. He's going to be there. There's a picture rocketing around the world right now of him shaking hands with Maduro. They met today. Maduro's also there for this. But I think it speaks so much to the title of your book, The Rebirth of an African Phoenix. And I want you to talk about that. Why do you think it is that it was so electrifying for people to hear that Ibrahim Traoré would be standing with these other world leaders like, Chairman Xi from China, President Lula from Brazil, the people who we know, like his presence? Burkina Faso is not a country people necessarily think of in the same way of Brazil and China, but in many ways, his name after Xi has been the most spoken of name in terms of attendees.
He's under fire. Just in the last 2 weeks, we've seen the captain, interim president. We've seen how there's been this plot against him, where they plotted to assassinate him and to overturn what's been going on in Burkina Faso. And we've seen, and this is really important, and kind of some of the things that I cover in the book, is how this isn't just some small, isolated internal thing. This is yet again how Western imperial powers are intervening in Africa and using other African leaders, other African countries to try and undermine what's going on. This is a time, and I talk about this extensively in the book, where we really have to get behind this shift that's taking place in Africa, and why it's so important that the interim president is in Moscow right now. Yeah, this really feels like a kind of almost like a Bandung moment, where you've got this gathering of all of these global majority countries who are turning up in Moscow and are saying, you know what, this is a statement from us about what we believe in, and that it's time for something new. So all of these nations, despite the threats that are being made against some of them, even the Serbian prime minister was threatened by the European Union. If you dare to go to Moscow and dare to celebrate Victory Day in Moscow, we will somehow sanction you. This is ludicrous. This is all going on at a time when European Union and many other countries are undermining the role that the Soviet Union played in the victory over the Nazis, where they're being wiped out of monuments that are placed right the way across Europe. And Eugene, that's why it's important that we understand that the statement that is being made by anybody who goes to Moscow is that we are not playing that game anymore. What we are about is building a new multilateral world. And that's really what I talk about in the book, frankly. But in reality, this is what's being played out in Moscow right now. It's a massive statement that's being made. The interim president of Burkina Faso is right at the heart of that. It's an inspirational figure.
Well, talk more about that, because when it comes to your book, The Rebirth of the African Phoenix, you talk about Africa's emergence from these colonial legacies. So Contextualize Traoré's foreign policy, like expelling French troops, and then, of course, aligning with Russia. How does that reflect that sort of past, and then perhaps this broader movement in various parts of Africa towards self-determination?
Well, I think when you start with the Sahel region, I think that's a great place really to start. And when you look at the way that the whole thing that's happening with the Alliance of Sahel Nations is being portrayed across the world, all you hear about it, and I'm a journalist, so all I get is I see all the wires and the way that they're being portrayed. It's a military regime and it's a coup, and these are all nasty, horrible people. What I said to somebody last week, I think, is really, really important. You know, we support Cuba. Cuba was liberated at the point of a gun, frankly. And many other nations across the colonial world were freed because people were prepared to stand up and do something about that. What we're seeing in the Sahel nations right now, I think, should be an inspiration to people who want to see something different across Africa, but who are fed up with this constant kind of bullying and the constant kind of exploitation of Africa by the Western nations, led, of course, by the United States. So what I talk about in the book is in one of the chapters, I give some examples of where that has taken place. So, for example, Libya is one example, and the way that the NATO nations, again led by the United States, attacked and have divided Libya. And this is the kind of game plan that they have. For the rest of Africa, they want to divide and rule. And we see it in other parts of Africa, the role that the United States continues to play in through their acolytes in places like Sudan and in places like Congo. That quite often now across Africa, they're not doing this straight up front themselves. They've got their playmates, they've got their people who are doing this on their behalf. And what I see right now taking place is a real shift. Because if you were looking at this kind of 10 years ago, then there wouldn't have been the confidence that that it was possible, I think, to stand up and do something against what the United States and their posse are trying to do right now. What we're seeing is people, because I think of the role that's played by China and the role that's played by Russia, in particular, those two nations, people have the confidence that they have some cover, that they're going to be able to help to create something different. And the language of this, Rania, is really, really important. That we look at this as multilateral, that we're not looking at creating another pole somehow, but what we're saying is that this is an opportunity for real sovereignty to be exercised by Africa. And let's face it, we haven't had a real sovereignty across Africa for 400, 500 years. This is a breakout moment for Africa. So I try to kind of illustrate that within the book. But I think much more important than what I think is a really good book and everybody should buy my book and all the rest of it is what is taking place right now. People are doing this in real life, and that's the importance of what's taking place in Moscow. But people are doing this in the Sahel region, and they're trying to do it elsewhere. And what's going on in the Sahel will give people the confidence to get rid of some of these misleaders that occupy the spaces within many places in Africa, because they are a real obstacle and they must be removed if there's going to be any prospect of real success. But once they've done that, there's a real opportunity to be able to take on the United States and the Western powers, the other Western powers as well.
No, absolutely. People should buy the book. It's a great price too. You're helping the working class out there. £17 roughly. It's worth much more, but I appreciate that. But speaking of the working class, you yourself are a trade unionist. You were once the assistant general secretary of Unison, I believe, and you talk a little bit in the book about the role of workers' movements in Africa, which is a very unique terrain because the informal sector has become so significant. So talk, if you could, about the need for and maybe some of the innovations that need to be made to really start to bring the trade union fight, into the forefront of the broader struggle here for Africa's rebirth.
One of the legacies, I guess, of the way that the colonial powers have operated is that they have informalized a lot of the labor market across Africa. So a couple of years ago, and again, I write about this in the book, I was in Kenya. And I thought I knew about a lot of this stuff, but I was talking to trade unionists in Nairobi, and they were telling me that 90% of the economy across the whole of Kenya is informal. So if we're trade unionists, how do you organize? How do you try and develop some sense of collective organization when it's all completely atomized, when people are on their own, and people are just really being put in the position quite deliberately by the Western powers of just thinking, I just need to make sure that I can put a roof over my head and the head of my and the roof and a roof over the head of my family, and put bread on the table of my family. So it's very individualistic, very deliberately, because it breaks down collective strength, breaks down collective organization. That's entirely deliberate. But African trade unionists are trying to deal with some of this stuff as well. So in places like Kenya, I saw the Metal Workers Union looking at the way that car repair workers were operating on one particular compound within Nairobi. And what they did was they created a sort of cooperative, and we're offering the help of the union to get training for those folks, because of course one of the industries that's going to develop within Kenya is the car industry. So if people are able to get training, are able to develop the skills that they've develop themselves informally, but more formalize and get qualifications within those industries, they're going to be in a better position to be in more formalized industries. So this is a way of trade unions who are trying to find a way of organizing those informal workers. And I think that's really important, that we just show some imagination. And frankly, one of the things that we've always done as people of African descent, again, I do write about this in the book, is we've had to be imaginative. We've had to be find ways of being, to break down the barriers that have been put in front of us so that we can develop, well, first of all, so that we could survive, first of all, but secondly, so that we could find ways of developing. One thing I'll say about Africa as well, Eugene, is that what we saw William Ruto, who I think there's major problems with Ruto as a politician, and some of the things that he's doing in terms of repressing the progressive movements within Kenya. But even he, I think, has understood the pressure that he's under within Kenya. And I think in the last 2 weeks, we saw him in China, in Beijing, making really clear that he's understood the need to pivot towards a much closer relationship with China, and by definition as well, I think at the moment with Moscow as well. That's huge, given the fact that he's been a real lackey of the West in recent times. So I think there's progress that's been made, but certainly from the trade union movement, I see a lot of trade unionists who are trying to be imaginative, who are looking at ways of doing things differently. And I think that's just so important because of the legacy of colonialism, frankly.
You know, Roger, this is so important. We could talk all day here. Unfortunately, we don't have all day, but it's an ongoing conversation. And I think your book, The Rebirth of the African Phoenix, A View from Babylon, great part of that conversation. African Uhuru, your book that just came right before this, also fantastic. I know it's in a continuum. I appreciate you putting all this out there. Once again, the island of Jamaica becoming the great spokesperson for the entire African diaspora. Roger McKenzie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Rania?
I mean, Eugene, I look forward to the day when, we have like a multilateral world where Africa as like a bloc is helping lead it rather than the horrific, just imperialist system we have today.
Well, speaking of the African continent and another critically important issue going on the continent, that's the ongoing war in Sudan. A lot to be said about that, so let me not editorialize too much. We are very happy to be joined on the show once again by Mossab Babo, who's a researcher on Sudan. Mossab, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for having me again. Pleasure to be here.
Of course, it's always an honor to have you, and I guess there's always a lot going on, but, in the context, well, the two kind of big things right now, I mean, obviously there's the ICJ case, but, the RSF, this launching of drones that is happening towards Port Sudan and other things, a lot of civilians, being potentially hurt by many things, including the intense fuel shortages. I mean, how do you evaluate this? I mean, the last time we had you on, the whole talk was, the Sudanese armed forces are now sort of sweeping through the country. They're getting ready to defeat the RSF. The whole thing will be wrapped up in a bow in a few months. And now that narrative seems to certainly be in question here with, even if they've lost some territory, seemingly a little bit of a resurgence here from the rapid support versus and using some harrowing tactics.
Yeah, so the SAF kind of eliminating the RSF and taking over, that's a rhetoric that's out there, but realistically, it was clear from the beginning from people who are kind of following SAF and its dynamics and everything militarily is that's a very difficult thing to do. And because of how much support the RSF has and because of their self-funding and how much gold mines that they control, how much cross-border access they have, from Libya and Chad and all of these countries that are bordering Darfur. So from the beginning of the war, the voice of reason was saying that basically, there needs to be some sort of negotiations to end the war, and that a military solution is not going to stop the war at all. And just an indication of that, the South Sudan war has gone on for 22 years before it ended with a negotiation. The war in Darfur, 19 years and multiple rounds of negotiations to try and stop the war. So the problem is, it was clear that there was some sense of euphoria once the RSF left Khartoum and left Jazeera State and these areas in the center, but they are still cemented in Darfur, and now they have new alliances where the SPLM North has joined them in a political alliance. And that will give them a bigger stronghold in areas like Kordofan and bordering with South Sudan. So unfortunately, right now, SAF kind of, took over Khartoum. There was a sense of euphoria. It seemed like they got more, weapons and more drones and more air power. And they actually hit Niala, which is in Darfur, and they destroyed some of the cargo planes that were coming in to the RSF. And even, there was a Kenyan pilot, there was a South Sudanese pilot over there. And that kind of speaks to the fear going forward of this now becoming regional rather than being contained within the borders of Sudan. We're starting to see the flare-ups right now in South Sudan, for example. These drone strikes for the past 5 days that have hit Port Sudan, they've definitely even crippled whatever oil was flowing through, and South Sudanese oil, let alone like Sudanese oil. So that's the problem. Like the more time goes by and there's no negotiated settlement to the conflict, the more you're going to see more destabilization. And even right now, you have RSF leadership saying that, if, SAF won't let them stay in Darfur and stay in Niala and these places, that they're going to hit with drones the rest of the areas that are controlled by SAF, not only in Port Sudan, but we're seeing drone strikes in Kassala. There's reports of even renewed drone strikes in River Nile State, bordering with Northern State and Medowi. They've hit the dam before, the dam in Medowi, and, cut off electricity to most parts of the country. So it's these kind of escalations right now that we're starting to see, and that are basically, leading to more suffering internally.
I mean, it's just horrifying. And of course, I was watching, I think it was CNN, um, and there was a segment of after there was this international court case against the UAE for its support for the RSF, right? And I guess the case was dismissed, even though human rights organizations, and we've talked about on this show before, the UAE's role in the conflict in Sudan. And it's been documented. But the CNN's hard-hitting anchor was interviewing like I don't know, somebody who worked, it might have even been the UAE ambassador in DC. And it was like the most softball questions ever. But it was pretty shocking that this got dismissed, or maybe it shouldn't have been shocking. But can you tell us what happened there? Because this was a case that was against a party that is basically, profiting off of a war and trying to, use a war to gain influence.
Yeah, so I mean, it hasn't been a secret, like even before the war. The UAE was using the RSF in their war in Yemen. They set up the actual, business structure for them to export gold to the UAE. And when the war started, the UAE was clearly supporting the RSF, going into Chad and then flying into RSF areas, and giving political cover as well to the RSF, mediating so that Hemeti can go and meet different African leaders and take that photo op and stuff like that. So what UAE did in Sudan, now it's coming to light. But the main problem is that with the ICJ and with other international bodies, the UAE has such a huge footprint in a lot of not only Western countries, but also African and Middle Eastern countries, where the amount of money that they've put into these governments makes them it allows them to kind of sway all of these governments to not really pay attention to it. So with the ICJ also, the case was dismissed on a technicality. The UAE didn't sign on to Article 9 and stuff like that, and the ICJ tried to get out of it, saying that it's not its jurisdiction. So it's also another hit to where people are now looking at international justice mechanisms as being very, useless when it comes to addressing these issues. And when you start looking at that, and now the escalation is happening where the Sudanese army just put out a few days ago that they've cut off all relations with the UAE. So, but it begs the question that, so for 2 years, the UAE's been supporting the RSF. And throughout all this time, the SAF government in Port Sudan hasn't taken any steps and has continued doing business with the UAE. So you start looking at it, well, okay, this isn't just about the RSF's relationship with the UAE. It's about the UAE's relationship with SAF as well. As undercover as it might be, it's like, okay, so if you have a country that's supporting a militia that's attacking the country and taking over, you would expect that the cutoff of relationships would be from the very beginning. But the fact that it continued for 2 years raises so many questions about this. But again, it also goes into the fact that the UAE is supporting the RSF, but Egypt has been such a huge actor in suppressing the people's movement in Sudan and cementing the military rule of Burhan and trying to control it. So, like I said in the last interview, for Egypt, if they control the states that are along the Nile, the White Nile and the Blue Nile, to them, they don't really care about what happens in the rest of the country. So, alluding to that, kind of Libya arrangement of, having two areas in the country that are controlled by two armies and backed by different countries as well. But the evidence, the amount of evidence of the UAE supporting the RSF and giving them all kinds of cover is overwhelming. Like there's no way you can dismiss a case like that unless there is a lot of things behind the scenes of SAF also being complicit in propping up the UAE. So that's it's a dent, but as far as bringing justice, but it's a much bigger question of accountability when it comes to these actors in Sudan.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about, the Libya style scenario or whatever emerges, I mean, all the various different aspects of this and all the levels of injustice, but, also sort of the wiping out of the discourse of the revolution that took place starting in 2019 around inequality and class and other pieces like that. I mean, of course, it feels like many years ago, but of course, ending the IMF deal and, sort of untangling all these corrupt corporations around the state governments and the more equitable distribution of resources and free education, healthcare. I mean, all these things are being raised by the resistance committees, to such a high degree. And now, I was reading something interesting about the Jazeera scheme, the agricultural scheme that's broken down this year, about how there's also attempts to sort of neoliberalize the agriculture even more. So in addition to even the conflict, even if we had a frozen conflict, so much of just for the average Sudanese person living in a rural area in the urban area, so much of the promise of a better life also, even if the war ends, that discourse having been wiped away feels like a big casualty of what's taken place so far.
That's why I'm so happy I'm coming after Mr. McKenzie. What he's speaking about, was exactly what was happening in 2019 up until the military coup in 2021. So not only was it a national, like, sovereign discourse, but it was also went down to the level of not just union movements and the Sudan Professionals Associations and taking, control of the labor market and stuff like that, but even, farmers co-ops and stuff, even in places like a Jazeera state, there's farmer co-ops all around there that were, on their way to taking control of the economy of those areas and starting to show solidarity from one place to another. And, you had like farmer co-ops connecting with consumer co-ops, in neighborhoods. These were the kind of things that were happening in 2019 up until 2021. And, we have colleagues who are describing this war right now that started in 2023 as a regional counter-revolutionary war. So it's not just Hemeti and Burhan who didn't want to see that, their monopolization and the military control of the sectors of the economy and giving it back to the people. It was also the countries that were backing them, that were actually pushing this coup and not wanting for the resistance committees and the wider movement, the unions and, the farmers and the marginalized areas and the liberation movements and all of these actors actually coming together and bringing back control of the country to the people. Because then it would have been also what Roger was talking about right now, is to have a sovereign multilateral relationship with other countries rather than having these, this Middle Eastern pole of the Gulf states and Egypt, kind of controlling the country. And that had a lot of ramifications. It wasn't only how Sudan relates to its neighbors, but it's also the Sudanese economy itself with all those resources working for the people. So it's kind of by design, like the way this war and who was pushing for it, previous Bashir regime elements, the RSF, all of these elements are kind of the counter revolutionary elements that didn't want to see that change happen in Sudan. So that's that, it's a lot of Sudanese right now are caught up in the war itself and defending themselves on the ground, and especially people who picked up arms after 2023 to defend themselves, but once people are starting to ask questions right now, and the questions are healthy as to what exactly is the point of this war. Because even if SAF wants to go and negotiate and there are ways, because the dismantling the RSF was always a demand since 2019. So that would still be a demand when sitting at the negotiation table and talking about a transition and moving away from the state of war to a state of peace and going through and giving actually the power back to the people, and continuing that discourse that actually happened in 2019 without giving special treatment to certain political parties or anything like that. There are ways where this can work out, but it's just not in the interest of the former Bashir regime and Burhan and these guys, and definitely not in the interest of the RSF and Hemeti and these guys, because the way they survive is by creating these huge economic conglomerates that they control.
Well, a lot to be said and a lot to continue to be said, but we will continue to follow this, and we really appreciate you helping us sort through it all. Mossab Baba, researcher on Sudan, thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you all. Very appreciate it.
Yeah, always very informative.
Eugene?
Love having the chance to chat with Mossab. Rania?
Yeah, no, it's excellent. It's excellent. I'm glad we can repeatedly keep covering this story, because it's often just like ignored, except for just like, here's the tragic photo
Yeah.
of a child in Sudan.
Indeed. Well, a lot to be said. There's a lot of things happening in the world, Rania. Before we go, I don't want to say too much about this, honestly, because there's, to get into it at the end of the show, we have to just do more of it when we move forward. But obviously the tensions and the fighting happening between India and Pakistan, which, could continue to escalate. And, I think there's a lot of aspects of this, but many, many years ago, Lord Elphinstone said in relationship to the British policy in colonized India that divide and rule, that was the Romans' phrase, and it should be ours. And I think when we look at what's happening now between India and Pakistan, dispute happening over Kashmir, almost all the disputes in South Asia, between, Bangladesh and India and all, there's every sort of angle you see, this is really the bitter fruits of partition. This is exactly what the British wanted. This is why they facilitated partition, why they in fact went out of their way to divide the subcontinent, because they were fearful that a united subcontinent coming out of colonialism could help, this is 1947, remember, shift the balance of power in the world in a major way. I mean, such a powerful part of the world, such a long history, such an amazing blend of cultures and religions and things that have contributed so much to the world in many ways in terms of its cultural impact in so many different areas of our lives, that could be bad for the West. You know what I mean? And what happened 2 years after 1947 is 1949, the Chinese Revolution. So I mean, the possibility of these giants of Asia emerging, and of course the British were trying to prevent that too, the emergence of real sovereignty and national independence in China, which of course they were responsible for destroying them with the First and Second Opium Wars. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they wanted to create a situation that capitalized on divisions that existed inside of the country, inside of this area that had been colonized, in order to have them focused and locked into a permanent war against each other, huge military industrial complexes directed against each other, as opposed to, a potentially different future. And I think it's a shame. It's unfortunate. I think you've got two governments here who are using this opportunity to distract from their own problems, quite frankly, that are quite significant. And certainly the working class and peasantry and poor and oppressed people in both countries will absolutely not benefit from this and haven't benefited from any of it. So there's a lot to be said. I mean, obviously, the proximate issue here is the ongoing, long running since 1947, majority sort of occupation of Kashmir by India, and the brutality that's been heaped on the Kashmiri people for so many decades, which they've been trying to push back against in every way. That certainly is right at the center of all of this. But I think, more importantly, it speaks to the challenges we face, not just in South Asia, because I think what's happening is so similar to what's happening in Africa in so many different ways. And I think a lot of how Africa is set up and the way the lines are drawn and the way colonialism both started and ended was designed in a similar way to try to create these ticking time bombs that are tough to defuse, but that ultimately make it harder for countries of the global South to come together against those who are responsible for their poverty and deprivation. So I just wanted to mention something quickly about that, because I know everyone is seeing it, but I don't know if there's anything you also wanted to add.
I mean, divide and conquer, indeed. The impact of colonialism never stops playing out, and also is continually reinforced and I mean, not to take it away from India and Pakistan, because it's like an incredibly awful and dangerous situation that's taking place there, and it's escalating quite quickly. But, you know, just this week there was this piece that I read by a friend of the show, Joseph Messad, in Middle East Eye, where he goes into the history of Israel. And actually not just the Israelis, but just colonizers attempting to sectarianize the Middle East, particularly the Levant. And he puts it in the context of what we're seeing right now with the current government in Syria attacking the Druze population, and the Israelis trying to swoop in saying, we'll protect you, as a part of a plan to, you know, they want to create a bunch of sectarian statelets. And it never ends. It never ends. And he goes really deep into that history. I hope to have him on the show sometime soon so we can kind of like delve into some of that. But my goodness, I mean, the divide and conquer all over the global south continues to have repercussions today. And I think one of the most important ones is India and Pakistan, because these are huge countries with huge populations and lots of weapons.
Including nuclear weapons, which is a very, very, very dangerous scenario. So you hope they can find a way to step back from the brink. And you know, look, I'm not South Asian. I'm not from South Asia. But just like I hope for a Pan-African future for Africa, I'm hoping for a Pan-South Asian future for South Asia, because so much of this, and when we think about and talk about China, I mean, you know, when the Chinese talk about how they overcame the 100 years of humiliation in 1949, when they established the People's Republic of China, so much of it was reunifying the country, because it had been, you know, brutally divided in different ways because of these policies. So we see the use of division in the global south, and it can't be overstated. So, you know, I'm hoping cooler heads prevail in this moment and it doesn't escalate, you know, even more. But that beyond that, you know, you always hope in any sort of crisis, it offers the opportunity for people to look around the corner and perhaps come with more liberatory futures. So anyway, we'll continue to cover this, continue to talk about this, and hopefully we won't have to continue to talk about escalation, but just the context of how we move forward. But on that note, Rania, I think that'll end it for us here today. Anything you would like for our viewers to know before we get out of here?
Yes, just a gentle reminder, and I'm emphasizing gentle because I was not rude this episode. I want to remind people to please make sure you smash that like button. Like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Thank you, John. And also, if you like Breakthrough News, if you love Breakthrough News, because who wouldn't love Breakthrough News, and all of our incredible programming here, including the Freedom Side Live, My Show Dispatches, the Socialist Program, the China Report, Eyes Left, and it goes on and on. And if you want to see more of it, you can help make that happen by becoming a patron, going to patreon.com/breakthrough news, and you can become a member for as little as $5 a month. You'll be helping to support independent media, and you'll get access to exclusive merch, as well as exclusive content. And most importantly, you will be helping this very important independent media outlet at a crucial inflection point. You will help us go and grow. So patreon.com/breakthrough news.
Agents of the imperialist bourgeoisie, that's who doesn't like Breakthrough News, but that's who we don't want to like Breakthrough News, so that means we're doing a great job. Well, yes, thank you. Very good reminder. Shout out to all of our patrons, shout out to all of our guests, shout out to all of our viewers and anyone who's done anything to promote this show and promote this channel. For myself, for Rania, for the whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.